Hi everyone, this is Stephanie from Vegan Mainstream, and it is Webinar Wednesday. So I'm excited to have you guys join me. As you probably know, we do these webinars once a month, and these are opportunities to kind of talk about key items of either challenges, areas that you can do things maybe to take your business to that next level, or just share with you kind of trends and things that we're seeing that people are doing in the business world, and also more importantly in the vegan business world that maybe you can leverage, learn from, and really take into your business as a way to really strengthen what you're doing and really make your and create a sustainable business. Because I think the key here at Vegan Mainstream is we really want to be a support for many of you out there that are building, creating, and establishing vegan businesses, so that we don't have any more vegan businesses, going out of business or struggling with connecting with customers, finding customers, reducing costs, creating exceptional, amazing products, and so forth. So we hope in these webinar series that we take the time to really get you kind of connected with what's really going on out there, and also giving you the tools you need. Tonight's webinar is a little bit different. We haven't done this topic before, and I'm really excited. We posted on one of our Facebook pages and asked people for feedback on what type of topics or information they would like to learn about or hear about. And what we've done is it's gotten some feedback that people are really interested in this kind of outsourcing topic. So we're going to get started in a few minutes. I see we had a question. Someone had posted hello, so I'm just trying to make sure we're not having any sound issues or anything like that. If you are able to hear me, what I'd recommend is posting maybe a quick message. If you're watching this on Google, you can just post a message there in the chat box and say, yep, I'm here, I can hear you. If you're on our website and you registered there and you're watching, you should see a box on the page that will actually allow you to put your name and email in and submit your questions. So if we can just take a quick minute before we kick everything off here and just make sure that everyone's able to hear, as well as we are connected, everyone's able to see the slides and so forth. I'm just going to take a 5-second break here just to make sure we're all set up. All right, and is anyone having trouble watching or accessing things on the on our website? I'm just looking now. I'm seeing a couple comments. So sorry, guys, just making sure we're all set from a logistical standpoint here before we get this party started. All right, Katie. It looks like some people are having a little bit of trouble looking at the video on the page. So we're just going to do a quick refresh just to see if we can fix that really quick from a technical standpoint. All right. I'm just going to post a quick message for people. If you are able to see the slides, or the slides aren't showing up or anything like that, please just let people know to refresh their page. Katie, if you can hear me, if you can just post maybe on Twitter or on the page, just letting people know to refresh their page. They should be able to see the slides now. I'm looking at the screen right now, and it looks like everything is working properly and correctly. All right, so with that, what I'm going to do is switch focus here and start to look at the slides. And thanks, guys, for the feedback. It seems like a couple people are able to hear. Thanks, Katie. I see your comment as well. Okay, So I love questions during the presentation, so I'm going to go through the slides that I put together to give you a little bit of background on what I think you should be doing if you're considering outsourcing, thinking about outsourcing, or have heard about outsourcing and you're trying to decide if it's right for you. I'm going to go through a lot of that tonight. So if you have any other challenges or any questions, you can definitely let me know. But let's get started and jump into outsourcing. And as I mentioned before we jumped into that kind of technical issue there, is I actually posted on one of our groups and asked people what are they interested in, what kind of topics should I do for webinars. And in the future, if you have any other topics, please, please, please let me know. I definitely love to get feedback, but this was one that was actually requested. And I think for a lot of people in small businesses, we see the big corporations using terms like outsourcing. We see them setting up structures and businesses and even offices and facilities overseas and things like that. So we see it in kind of that bigger landscape. But for many of us, we're small businesses. We're not looking at setting up a separate office. We're not looking at, maybe even in some cases, not even going overseas. So what I want to talk about tonight is how outsourcing works for small businesses and specifically in vegan businesses, and how it really can be a tool or a great way for you to either pull in some amazing expertise or a great way to get some short-term projects and work done that maybe is a little bit difficult or a little bit challenging for you to do in-house because of either your current team that's in place, maybe because of cost or budgetary issues, or maybe because of just timing, meaning from a seasonal standpoint, you have some projects and some things that surge in your business, and you need to think about how do I staff for that? How do I get the resources in place so that I can get things done when they're needed? And that's the key with outsourcing, is you're really using this as a tool to help you optimize getting things done. Okay, so let's, I guess, jump into the first slide and then we'll take it from there. The first place I wanted to start is kind of the myths of outsourcing. And the reason I talk about the myths of outsourcing first is because I want to break down either any barrier or anything that you're kind of thinking or wondering or considering that I wouldn't do outsourcing because of this. Or sometimes there's some baggage that we all bring to the outsourcing process. And I kind of want to get you to lay that down and kind of think of outsourcing in a fresh way, or maybe in a way that's much more of a growth. And the reason I say that is for a lot of people, when they think of outsourcing, they always think, well, that means I'm sending it overseas. Does that mean I'm sending it to XYZ country? And that's really not the case. I mean, technically, you can outsource to someone in the US. Because at the end of the day, we're really talking about you bringing on people kind of as your extended team, as your extended resources for your business. So these aren't people that show up every day into the office. These are not people that you control or manage their full schedule, meaning their daily task, or they're reporting to you directly, or they're working with you, on a set hourly basis. These are normally people that you're going to be working with on a project work. So yes, they know they have to get it done by XYZ date, but how they get it there, how many hours they work on which day, and all that stuff is a little bit more fluid when you think about outsourcing. So I want to kind of break down that idea that you have to outsource to certain countries or certain places. You can truly do it here in the US. You can also do it anywhere. I mean, you can do it in Asia, you can do it in Europe. You'll be surprised, you even can outsource to Canada. I think sometimes we kind of have that preconceived idea of where it's going, and the reality is you can really outsource anywhere, and it can be here locally. The other thing I want to kind of slash really quickly is the concept that outsourcing is about kind of like the dump it and forget it, meaning all the stuff you don't want to do, kind of like the junk work. It's like, I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to deal with that. Why can't I just outsource it? And I want to stop you there, because while there are things that may be points of frustration, outsourcing is not really the tool to just dump things in or just kick the things out that you don't want to be bothered by. The reason being is outsourcing is a responsibility, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, because for you to get really the best work, it's so important that you are engaged in the process. It's so important that you're working with this person, communicating with this person, and so forth. So I don't want you to get the misconception that it's really like you can just take like the files on your desk and literally pick it up and just dump it on someone else's desk from a virtual standpoint. And they're just going to dig through it, figure it all out, and get it all done and get it done well. That's not the case. Outsourcing really does require often, especially in the beginning, it will require a lot more work than you would if you maybe had done it yourself. So I want to make sure you're ready to invest that time, and understand that what you put into outsourcing, what you put into resources that you use from a virtual standpoint is ultimately what you get out. The other thing is, I think sometimes when people think of outsourcing, they think it's just, I'm going to be able to get it cheap. I can get it really inexpensive. I could just grab someone and have them work on A, B, and C. And yes, in some cases, pulling in resources outside of your business or outside of like hiring a full-time resource can be cheaper. Absolutely. But I want you to not kind of just think about the money aspect of it. Because when you're thinking about outsourcing for your business, when you're thinking about using outsourcing to more grow your business, as opposed to outsourcing as your solution for frustration, I think you can start to put on a different hat, because now you can start to think of the idea of, how do I use outsourcing to maybe help me get expertise that I don't have in-house? How do I use outsourcing as a way for me to get someone to work on a project who's great at this? And this isn't something I need all the time. It's something I need 3 times a year, 4 times a year. I use a good example of that as maybe accounting, or sometimes on the financial side. I find accounting is something that a business has to do. They really need to do it. We have to do it because we have to pay taxes. We have to do it because really it's the only way for you to know the true health of your company. But in many small businesses, you don't need an accountant every day in and out. Especially until you get to a certain scale. I mean, you start to bring in bigger numbers and serious numbers, and income is coming in and bills are paying, you may find that you need someone. But for most people, they don't need an accountant every day. They don't need someone who's working 20-hour, 40-hour work weeks. You need people who are maybe working a couple days a week. Or for most small businesses, I find you need someone maybe on a quarterly basis, someone who's going to help you shore up your books, run through all of your transactions for that month, do some reconciliations and so forth. And then that's it. So this is more of what I kind of call a surge resource. This is kind of somebody who you bring in when there is a big project or something to be done. They complete that task, and then they go back down kind of into a mode where you're not utilizing them. And the reason this is important, or I find it works really big for small businesses, is A, you don't have to carry that cost every month, day in and day out, or every daily cost. It becomes more of a 4 times a year cost. So now you're starting to match up the cost with the need. As opposed to, I think sometimes when we need resources or we need help, a lot of times we think people have to be available all the time to help us solve a problem. And the reality is, based on the project, you have to match up the need with the project. And what you may find is you may only need somebody X amount of times a year. You may only need somebody for a quick 60 days because you have a big project or a product launch going on. You may find that you may need someone who helps out, let's say, for example, for customer service, maybe 2 days a week. So I want you to start thinking about things differently when you think about outsourcing, because you're really trying to pull in these resources to help you grow and help you cover things that maybe either A, you don't have the time to do, you don't have the expertise in-house to do, or you don't have the resources available in these kind of like lumpy cycles that if you're outsourcing or getting someone to do freelance work or something like that, that can fill that void much better. Okay? And then the last thing I wanted to do just before we start to go into some of the details is understanding that outsourcing, it's very difficult to find someone like you. I know for a lot of us, when you live in a small business bubble in the small business world, we kind of get to a point where you want to hire yourself. You want to find someone like you who can wear multiple hats, who's very quick at A, B, and C, who's great at X, Y, Z, and so forth. And what I want to tell you is that's very rare. It's hard to find someone who is like you, the founder, the CEO, the managing director, and so forth, especially finding them in an outsourced environment. And the reason I say that is most people who are like you are starting their own businesses. Most people who are like you are working in certain types of roles. They're rarely looking for outsourced, freelance, part-time, sometime types of roles. So when you think about outsourcing, you have to put on the right hat to understand that people who traditionally do a lot of freelance work, people who are traditionally are willing to do projects where they can be on call for a few hours a week or a few days a week and so forth. They're looking for that flexible schedule. What they're looking for is not a role where they are the manager, where they are the CEO. So I don't want you to think that when you want to outsource, that you are trying to replicate you and just get someone to do what you would do or how you would do it. You really have to understand that the people that are in those types of positions are often seeking a type of position. And you want to make sure that the type of project, the type of role you give is a match, because that's how you get good candidates. When you can match someone up with what they're looking to do, what they're an expert at, and the need that you have and get it to match, as opposed to a lot of times it's very difficult to hire a CEO-like person, but put them into a virtual assistant type of role. Okay, so that's where we start to sometimes have those mismatch. Excuse me. And that's where a lot of people have trouble because what they find is they're not getting what they expected. Okay, so now that we clear the page kind of with some of these myths, I want to talk about some of the successful tips I give people when it's time to outsource. The biggest one I tell people is always do a test run with your candidates. And what I mean by that is you may start with a candidate pool. Maybe 20 people applied for a position. Whether you posted it as a job on a job board, whether you use some of the third-party tools like Elance, Odesk, and so forth to find a candidate, once you've whittled that down to maybe 2, maybe 3 even candidates, is what I like to do, especially if I'm having a difficult time picking between candidates or understanding how well they'll work on a certain type of project, is I set up what I kind of call trial run. And I'll have them do whatever I'm asking them to do, is do it in a very small capacity and do it with a very finite project. And when I say that, I mean something small. I mean something that may take them 2 hours, maximum a day. And I know for a lot of people, when they think of small projects, they're like, oh, I'll just give them, work on my website. No, that's too big. When you want someone to do something, say you are hiring a coder as an example, you may have them work on one page of your website. You may have them create a plugin for you on your site. You may have them install a shopping cart on your site. So that way you have something really tight, focused. And the same thing from design. Instead of hiring someone to be your graphic designer, instead start with a small project. Ask them to design a flyer, a postcard. Because what happens is it gives you guys an opportunity to work together. It gives them an opportunity to show their skills and demonstrate their skills. And it allows you to do something in a setting that if it doesn't work out, you haven't made the larger commitment. You haven't gotten them up and running, set up, email accounts, access the tools, introduce them to the team. You haven't gone too far. So I highly recommend doing a trial run. Now, when I do a trial run, depending on the project or depending how big it is, if it's something that takes them an hour or two, we might agree that they do, a quick just assessment, a quick way to do it. If it's a bigger project and it takes them multiple hours or a day or something like that, often I will compensate them for that time. So I will say, hey, we're going to do a quick trial run, and I will call it that. Just see how we work together. If you're okay with that, I'd love to move forward. If I'm paying you X amount of hour, I'll pay you for those 2 hours to get that done. And trust me, it can sound like, well, why would I pay for it if I could get it for free? I understand that, but I'm really big on, if you can compensate people, do it and show them their worth, as well as I think it's a small investment. When you pay someone 2 hours to do some work for you, if you can find out up front who's a good candidate versus a great candidate versus someone who's not a good match, that 2-hour investment is much better than you bringing them on, getting them set up and going through the whole process and then finding out a month, 2 months later that it's not a good match, okay? The other thing is always hire people based on expertise, not price. And I'm not saying that we can't be price conscious or we're not worrying about budgets, but what I do want to kind of stress here is that it's more about what a person can do and what skills do they have. Are they great at WordPress? You don't want a person who just knows websites. If you have a WordPress site, hire someone who knows WordPress. If you have an e-commerce site and you're using a tool like BigCommerce or Shopify, hire someone that knows BigCommerce and knows those tools instead of just hiring a web coder. Same thing with anything else that you're hiring someone for. Let's say, for example, same thing as we talked about accounting earlier. What accounting software do you use? Find someone who knows your accounting software and has used it and worked with it. So that way you start to get a person who's closer to an expert in what you're looking for them for, as opposed to a generalist. Because when you hire a person that's a generalist, just because you're just looking at price, often you're going to have to spend the time to train them and get them up to speed. Okay? The other thing I always recommend is always have some type of overlapping work hours. Now, when you're hiring someone as outsource or freelancer or something like that, you can't control their day because in most places, these are going to be contract work. This is going to be 1099, if you're thinking about it from a tax standpoint. And that means you can't manage their day and say they have to start work at 9 o'clock and stop at this time and work on these projects at this time and so forth. You have to give them the freedom to complete the project in a timely manner, but complete the project and give them the basic guidelines. But what I like to do, especially when I get someone who's maybe a little bit more in maintenance mode, or someone who I have working with me on an ongoing basis, I ask when they're working on a project or when we're working on something that we have some type of hours that we overlap. Meaning, and this is more important when you start to hire people overseas. If you hire someone in India or in Asia or in Thailand or something like that, because the clock sometimes is the opposite, it can be very difficult to collaborate, to approve, or you can lose a lot of time, and you almost feel like you lose a 24-hour time clock if you don't have those overlapping hours. So what I ask a lot of people is to say, hey, when we're working heavy on a project, do you mind if we overlap for 2 hours in the morning, or if we overlap for 2 hours in the night, or something like that, just so we always have some time when we can get on Skype or something like that if we're working on projects, especially bigger projects or ongoing projects, or projects that have strong, tight deadlines, all right? The other thing is always establish a standard pay schedule. And what I mean by that is there should be a specific time that you pay people. And this is so important. I think a lot of times when we think about outsourced resources, we don't think about the structure that yields the best benefits. We think about the work we have to get done. But it's also important for a lot of these individuals, because they're not physically there, because know you personally, haven't worked with you, and so forth, money can be the sticky subject, the sticky place. So a lot of times what I do, and I think works really well, is establish how they will get paid. Do you pay them every Friday? Do you pay them every 2 weeks? Do you pay them on the 10th of the month? Like, really decide what that is and always pay on that time period. It will help build confidence in your team that as they start to work with you, work with bigger projects, that they're going to get paid. Because I hate to say this, but unfortunately, a lot of people have been burned, especially as freelancers and even small business owners, especially if you're in the service-based business. I know you probably even had this happen, where you maybe haven't gotten paid for your work. And because of that, to create goodwill with people is start to create a pay schedule and pay and always pay on that schedule. There's nothing wrong. And it's really similar to emulating what you would do for a full-time employee, because they would know when they get paid. So you want to do the same thing. And I find that works really well for collaboration, trust building, and also for people willing to go the extra mile for you. The other thing is, number 5, I would say, is stay actively involved. Like I said earlier, this is not a dump exercise. These are people you have to talk to. They're people. Just because you outsource them doesn't mean that they don't deserve and shouldn't have a certain amount of your time, a certain amount of your attention, because they need it. If you're trying to nurture someone, if you want someone to better understand who you are, what your business stands for, and emulate that, this is really important because a lot of people do a lot of outsourcing for customer service. And I find where they fall down is they don't spend time with that person. They don't tell them how I want you to respond to my customers when you're responding to emails, or when you're picking up voicemails or calling customers back. They don't give them scripts. They don't get on the phone and say, okay, what kind of issues have you run into? Do you have candid responses for it? Do I need to write some candid responses? Are you getting certain types of feedback? And do I need to make changes to my website or to the process and so forth? And that's what I mean, get involved. Individuals who you're using as outsourced resources, often they will hold the key for improvements for your business, for your products. So make sure you keep that connection and that communication going, because it's going to be a great way for you to feed back into your business. And then the last thing I always give people advice on how to really be successful at outsourcing is to create project milestones. I think a lot of times we think of giving people work and just giving them a deadline on when it should be done. But the reality is most projects have multiple things that either have to be done in the process, meaning there's 3 or 4 or 5 steps to it. Maybe there's information that's needed by XYZ date so that they can finish the project and so forth. So build in those milestones for 2 reasons. It gives you more visibility to what's going on. So you don't have someone, especially as an outsourced resource, sometimes since they're not physically in front of you or physically available, sometimes we can lose track of time of who's working on what and how long it's taking. And if you have milestones, it allows you to make sure that projects don't kind of spin out of control, meaning too much time is allocated to a project, meaning someone's not having difficulty or roadblock and they're not getting the help that they need. Often milestones are going to help make sure that you see something early enough on that maybe you've changed your mind on how you'd like to do it or what you'd like to do, as well as it gives you a way to see how people are progressing in a project. Because it's very easy to say, hey, this is a 7-day project. I estimate I gave it to this person. At the end of 7 days, is it ready? And if you ask them at the end of 7 days and it's not ready or something happened, you didn't build any buffer or any process to make sure that you had time for course correction or changes or anything like that. So if you have a 7-day project, set up a milestone after day 2, and then after day 4, and then maybe after maybe a quick one after day 6. And then the final project gets delivered on the 7th day. You could have 2 milestones, but whatever works for you. I just want to make the point that milestones is such a great way to stay on track and such a great way to make sure that you have a successful project. Okay, so let me just check in so far. Any questions so far about how to be successful, how to make it work, and so forth? I'm just checking really quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. Doesn't look like I did. And so far, looks like we're good on the questions. Just comments. Looks like everyone's able to hear and see. So we are all set from a technical standpoint. Okay. So let's talk about the process of outsourcing. And I really want to make sure you kind of understand it as a process. Now, as you start to outsource, as you start to consider outsourcing, you're going to have to build out what is your ideal process. But what I wanted to do here is just give you an idea, number one, that there really is multiple steps to the process. Now, you can move through this very quickly. It doesn't mean this has to be like a 60-day exercise. This could be something you do in 2 weeks. But what I want to kind of really illustrate here is that to get the best out of and the most out of outsourcing is making sure you've gone through each one of these steps, no matter how quickly you go through them. But making sure you hit them. And I think the first step and that first column is kind of the prep work, which is what's the need? Why do you need someone? What do you actually need them for? And be very careful. Don't fall into the trap of like the catch-all, like the idea was, well, I just need a virtual assistant. I just need someone I can just give stuff to. And in some cases, you need a virtual assistant as a manager. I'm not saying that a virtual assistant doesn't make sense. I would just want to say to you is spend some time and pick your brain and make sure, is it a virtual assistant you need, or do you need someone with specific expertise? Do you need someone who can do A, B, and C? Do you need someone who has the skills to do X, Y, and Z? Because often you may do better hiring somebody to actually do a specific project as opposed to just bringing on someone who's kind of like a jack of all trades and hoping that they can juggle every ball in every project that you bring to them. The other thing is start to think about how long do you need them. And I say this because I think people forget, and I've mentioned this a little bit before, is that outsourcing is great for projects. And it's great for quick projects, 2-week projects, 8-week projects, 6-month projects. They don't have to be things that are going to exist, or the need is something that's going to exist for the next 2 to 5 years. It may be a need that you're going to have short time because of what you're doing. And a product launch is a really good idea, good example, because when you're often coming out with a brand new product or a brand new service, there's often a lot of work that has to be done. There's a lot of materials that need to be created, a lot of materials that need to be printed. There's copy that needs to be done. There's websites that need to be updated. There's maybe press releases that need to be written, blog posts that need to be prepared. There's all this kind of list of stuff. And once you get that stuff together and done and created, and then you have your launch. Post-launch, you normally don't need those same resources moving forward because you've gotten all your brochures and all those materials together. So I want you to think of outsourcing as not just someone that you hire for ongoing, but someone you can really hire for them in your business every once in a while, and then pulling that resource back as far as those hours when you don't need them. And the key is, and we did talk about this a little bit, and I'll talk about it, we talked about hiring great candidates, is knowing what you need. And just really going into the next kind of bucket on here as far as requirements, is really understanding what kind of help you need. Who do you need? Why do you need it? What kind of expertise? What do you need them to actually do and do well? And what do you need them to either do for you or do for a member on your team? The more you drill into that and drill down, and you can write that out on a piece of paper, the better you will, the higher chances you will get of getting an amazing and great candidate. The other thing is start to think about the budget. How much money do you have to set aside for this resource? And I bring this up because you may find that you need a resource, but you don't have the budget right now to do it. So the reason I actually have you do the budgeting now before you start doing the searching is because if you find you don't have the money to do it right now, then you may do something in your business. You may do a promotion. You may actually pick up a new project. You may try to bring on one more client or something like that so you can cover that cost. Because like I said, maybe it's a product promotion. Maybe it's a good 60-day, 90-day position that you really need to fill. So you understand how much money you need. But if you know how much that is, then you might have to do something in your business to stretch, to pull in some additional revenue to make that happen. So if you have the budget, the next thing you have to do is search, find a candidate. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the tools and resources that you can use. But the key is you want to search as wide as possible. You want to look at as many candidates as you can. And the reason I like for people to look at a lot of candidates is for many of us, we're not HR people. We're not people that are hiring people all day long or in that mode or in that mindset. So a lot of times when I cast or I look for a candidate, the reason I like to look at a lot of people, get an idea of what's available out there, is so I get a better understanding of what I need and what skills are available out there. Is it a good match? Is what I'm asking for making sense? Am I pulling in the right resources? As well as I've found plenty of people that maybe applied for job A, but I really could use them in job B. So it's a great way sometimes to make sure that when you do post, you don't just post on one site, post on as many job board sites, post as many places you can to get those people. The interview is very, very important. It's all about preparation, and I'll talk a little bit about later, but the interviews are super, super important that you schedule them. I like to schedule my interviews tight. So say, for example, if I'm looking for a candidate, I may spend a couple of weeks looking for a candidate, and then I'll set aside 1 week where I try to interview everyone so that my mindset is like ready and I'm thinking about who I'm talking to, what they need. I don't have any distractions and I'm focused on it, and I'm really kind of putting myself in a hiring manager role. The other thing I like to do, like I mentioned before, is I do a test run. I think it's huge, and I feel that you really want to make sure that test run, that you have some level of feedback that you're giving someone. Even if it's someone you decide to hire, making sure that you use that process and that opportunity to get them to do a small scale project and then give them some feedback. Once you've given them feedback and you've decided, okay, this is someone that I want to bring on. This is someone who I believe is going to be an ongoing resource for me, like I said, maybe for customer service as an example. What I like to do is get them set up on the tools. And what I mean by this is if you have a project management tool, you want to get them on there. If you're going to give them an email address from your company, You want to get that stuff set up. As far as a tool for tracking time, if you're using an Excel spreadsheet or you're using an online tool, get them set up on everything before you give them their first project, because you want to make sure logistically they're in the mix. And I'll also talk a little bit later about how a lot of these tools will help you better manage the relationship. The next thing I like to tell people is, even if it's an ongoing task, I still give someone a small project as their next phase. And the reason being is, I think sometimes, you're as business owners, you're like knee deep in the problem. The issue is, and sometimes maybe when you pulled in a resource, you might have waited a little too long, so the problem is huge. And what you don't want to do is take a brand new resource or a brand new freelancer, a brand new individual, or an eager person who, really wants to work and help, and dump stuff on them. Two reasons. A, they may not know your business. They may not know how you work. They may not understand your brand. They may still have to get up to speed on the product. So what you want to do is allow that time for them to do that. And what I do is I normally give them a small project, a small portion of what I want them to do. Or I give them a carve out a piece. So for example, if they're doing customer service, I may have them just do email customer service instead of email and phone. If I have them doing customer service, I may have them just managing the emails and making sure the emails are getting to the right person before I have them going off on their own and responding to emails and so forth. So they may just be doing more filtering in the beginning of understanding what the issues are, who to forward them to, and how to get them resolved. So that way they kind of get their feet wet, as you say, and get a good assessment of what you're doing first before you just throw them into the pit and they feel like it's too much coming at them too fast. Because what you'll find is, some people, because you created so much pressure and anxiety, they won't perform well. And that's really just because you've given them too much work too quickly. Once again, after that small project, I give people a ton of feedback, what I liked, what I'd like them to work on, and then I go into ongoing mode. So like I said, this can feel like a lot of steps, but the key here, like I said, you can do this in 2 weeks, you can do this in 1 week, it doesn't matter how quickly you go through it. I do just find that if you are outsourcing and you want to do it right, is you want to take the time to go through these steps, no matter how quickly you do them. Okay? So after you've figured out, okay, this is my process, this is how I'm going to get it done, now you have to decide, what in the world are you going to outsource? And what I find for a lot of people is they struggle with, well, what should I outsource? And I find where most people fall down is sometimes they outsource something that they really shouldn't be outsourcing. And that's why they're having difficulty, because they're taking something that really requires internal expertise, that requires somebody to know the integrated part of your business. And what I find is, you may have somebody who maybe worked for you for a couple of years and then they move into more of an outsource role. That can work. You may have somebody that you worked with for years, and over the years they worked on different projects and so forth. So maybe some of the things that you didn't outsource them to before, you started to outsource them later. That can work. But from a starting standpoint, or from a basic understanding, I really kind of feel like the items in purple on the page are what I recommend as your baseline things to outsource. And the items in the green bucket are things that I do not recommend you outsource right away. And in many cases, I think you're going to have a lot of trouble outsourcing those things. And the reason being is, what I find is the best work to outsource are projects that have start and stop tasks. They have things that a person can say, yes, it's done. Yes, it's complete. They aren't these projects that are kind of like open and never ending items. And a lot of times when you're looking at things from sales and marketing standpoint, they're just rolling tasks. You move from one task to the next task, and all the tasks often either link to each other and build on each other. So the challenge is, when you start to try to outsource marketing or sales and so forth, is you need someone who's either close to the business, is constantly getting a lot of feedback, and is really understanding how to represent you to the world, because a lot of those tasks are external tasks. And what I find is, when you try to outsource those tasks, you find you have more mistakes, you have more challenges, as well as I don't recommend you do a lot of outsourcing on things that are the revenue generators for your business. There are the tools that actually drive income in your business. because often those are the things where they really need much more internal support, internal guidance, and internal instruction structure to be successful and done well. Now, I'm not saying you can never outsource anything from a marketing standpoint. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying typically, if you're trying to decide where to start and what to outsource, I highly recommend starting with that purple column. Like I said, accounting, website coding, design, manufacturing is a great thing if you're doing things like co-packing. Maybe you have a lot of the shipping and handling. So you have a product that has to be shipped out to your customers, whether maybe you're selling t-shirts or you're selling hair care products or fingernail polish, whatever those things. Maybe you have an outsourced resource that will actually process all your orders and ship them out. Editing's a good thing where a lot of people will use an outsourced resource. I have another resource help you do that because it's a very specific task. It's an art, it's a document, it's a book, it's something that kind of has a good start and stop. And then customer service. Now, in an ideal world, it'd be great to have everything internal. It'd be great to have all the experts in your business and everyone at your fingertips, and be able to do it in a very cost-effective way. But that's not always the case. So like I said, think of outsourcing as a way to help you get the resources you need quickly, to get the resources you need when you need them. And what I find is these are the common ones. Any questions about anyone out there maybe trying to outsource something and they're struggling with it, or thinking about outsourcing something and trying to figure out, should I outsource it? Should I keep it internal? If you do, just post it and I'll take a peek at it. The other thing I always recommend is when people are trying to figure out to outsource is it really should be project-based work. It shouldn't be that strategic think, about how do I develop a new product? How do I go into a new market? How do I expand beyond my current location? A lot of that work really is stuff that you need. Now, I'm not saying that you might not pull in a consultant or something like that. We're not talking about those types of resources because for the most part, consultants never really become your daily part of your business. But what I'm talking about is trying to take something strategic like that and putting it in the hands of someone who is completely outside of your business and doesn't get that not only internal thought, but also maybe doesn't have the exposure they need to everything that you have going on, often doesn't set you up for the best results. And like I said, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It's never been successful this way. What I'm really telling you is these are the ideal places to start, and then you can transition from there. Okay? The other thing is when people start talking about outsourcing, I think a lot of times there's confusion on the roles, what you're supposed to be doing, who's responsible for what, and how it's actually working. And like I said about that myth earlier, a lot of people think it really is, here, I throw it over the fence and the person's going to catch it, do it, and send it back over the fence to me with a beautiful bow, and it's perfectly done. And that's not the case. At the end of the day, everyone still needs a boss. If you're going to have someone that you've outsourced to, they have to have a sense of accountability. They have to know who they report to. If it's you, if it's someone else on your team, the key is someone still has to be responsible for that work product. If that person feels responsible and accountable to the individual that you've hired for outsourcing, and that outsourcing person feels that they are accountable to you or someone on your team, you tend to get better product because everyone feels the responsibility. And not only that, then you start to feel the responsibility of making sure that both sides get what they need when they need it. So it starts to create a good handshake of a relationship. And I think sometimes when we think about outsourcing, we think about it is like, I keep using the word resources. I struggle even myself when I use that word because I'm using it more generically. But at the end of the day, you're hiring a person, an individual, and treat them that way. Treat them with respect. It's so super important because this is a person that may be the person that saves you one time or stays up late or works late one night to really take care of you and your business. So really, truly think about that and treat them as such. The other thing is you got to write stuff down. It's all about getting the communication going and getting it in a documented form. The reason being is we all remember conversations and situations different. So because of that, it means there's very difficult sometimes to make sure we're on the same page. We're thinking about the same project. We're trying to accomplish the same thing if we don't have a document or something we both can go to and reference. And that's what works best when you're outsourcing, is create that document, create a central place. For many of you, I find it's using a project management tool. For others, you may have to set up a Word document that just explains what's the process, what they should do, how they should communicate, and so forth. And then the last thing I always want to say is they really have to support anyone you outsource. The key is they have to know that they can get the attention they need when they need it. And the biggest thing I find is for a lot of people outsourced, they kind of don't feel like they're part of the team. They feel like they're kind of like the, as they say, like the black sheep of the family type of feeling. And when someone feels that way, sometimes if they have a problem, they have a challenge, they'll have a hard time asking for help. But if you create an open door policy, if you create a way that they feel like they have the support, they can ask any of the questions, they can make mistakes and really be able to rebound from that, you're going to get a better result product. Because at the end of the day, we all make mistakes. It's hard for us to get everything right the first time. So create that environment for someone who's not around you all the time, someone who's not able to know how you work and why you work the way you do and why you do tasks in the order you do and why you prefer option A versus option B. You have to give them that support, that interaction, and that ability to get to know you, get to know your business, and get to know how to create and produce amazing work for you. And a lot of that has to do with giving them support. Now, I'm not saying that you got to micromanage someone. I'm not saying you should be asking them every 5 minutes, is it done? What's going on? What's update and so forth. But instead, it's all about creating that structure. And that's what those bullet points on the left-hand side is. Does a person send you a weekly email update to say this is the status on all their projects? Do they use a tool like I use Basecamp? And when they finish a project, do they check it off? So that way you can go into Basecamp and say, okay, I put 10 tasks in here. They checked off 5. I know they're 50% of the way through it. Do they have a tool or a way using a project management tool where they can post an update on individual tasks, where they can ask questions on individual tasks, where they can go and access files? Maybe they're going into Dropbox or something like that. What is that actual structure around how they complete tasks? How do they know new tasks are done? How do they communicate to you what is done? And how do they let you know if they need help or additional information? The other thing is timelines. This is why I really heavily rely on project management tools when you're doing virtual teams or anything like that, because it helps you communicate timelines and deliverables and what's coming up. The other thing I think a lot of us fall down on is we forget that there has to be some type of review or approval process. If you have someone who's doing anything that faces your customer, especially something like customer service, what's the process? Do they BCC you on emails? Do they write down the candidate responses, email them to you, you approve them, and those are the ones they move forward? Are they able to handle XYZ issues on their own? But if any other issues come up, then they should report back to you or let you know. People need those guidelines to understand how do they move forward and what do they have to do before they know they can either go to the next step or what they should be sending out to people. Training is another crucial thing. It is your responsibility to train individuals on what you do in your system. Now, it's not your responsibility to teach them WordPress if they're going to be coding. It's not your responsibility to teach them InDesign or Photoshop if they're a designer. But it is your responsibility for you to train them on, these are the colors that we use for all of our materials. This is the colors I use across the board, so I want them to be consistent. Here's our logo. I want you to use the logo on everything. We always put phone number and email address, or when I do print advertisement, I always want to put a URL on that's a Perl or a custom URL because I want to have trackability. Like, let people know what is your process, what is your kind of standard operating rhythm so that they can implement against it. And then the final thing is feedback. Feedback is so important, and it's really your responsibility to understand how you're giving feedback and when. And by putting these things in place, this is how other people will know what their role is, what they need to do versus what you want to do. Now, so you've done all this, you understand the roles, you get it, you're like, okay, Stephanie, I got it. So how do I just basically have a strong team? And I find having a strong virtual team revolves around 4 different buckets. Number 1 is all about project management. And the key is using a project management tool. I know for many of you, you just want to use email and go back and forth on email, and you can. But it's more ideal to use a project management tool. And why I say that is because it keeps things more organized. And the more projects and more tasks you work on, instead of having to do like a general search in your mailbox on what did we talk about when, If you use a project management tool, many of them will organize your conversations or even your emails in some cases around a specific task. So therefore, if you need to go back and reference what was the conversation about about that plugin that we wanted to put in, then you can go back and look at that plugin. What was our XYZ conversation about the reconciliation that we did on the bank account for the accountant? Why did she reconcile it this way? Or how did we handle a mismatch between the ledger and what the bank said? A lot of that stuff, if you start to document it in your project management tool, now you have an archive of what was discussed, what happened, and how you did things. This is also important because, people move on. You hire resources, you hire freelancers, you hire people part-time or sometime, and life changes and they take new positions, new roles, or maybe you hire them to do something different. So by using that project management tool, you have a huge, nice way to archive what's happening and what's going on. It's also a great way, like we talked about before, to track time, to actually approve work. And for someone like myself, and I'll show you in the next slide, the tools I use, I actually have a time tracking tool that's linked to projects. So it makes it easy for my team when someone's working on a project, that they can click a little button and it starts the timer, and then they can click another button to stop the timer for each individual project. Now, for some of my team, they like manually typing it in. Either way is perfectly fine for me. I don't want to micromanage my team, but I do want to make it easy for them to track their time based on the tasks that they're doing. So I use a tool to be able to do that. And what I find is it works really well because it helps me for budgeting. It helps me for cost management. It also helps make sure that I'm on the same page as far as how many hours are spent on a specific project or how challenging a project is, or if we want to replicate a project and do it more often, what kind of budget do I need for it moving forward? The other thing is you really need project management if you have a big team, meaning if you're just hiring like one person or two people to do stuff, and you're not necessarily creating a team environment where they're interacting with each other, they just interact with you, project management tool works fine, and you need that. But if you're going to kind of operate as a 3-person team and it's someone who doesn't work with you on an ongoing basis, and like I said, you're using a freelance or outsourced resource, project management tool is even more important because if people have to communicate across teams, across locations, if they have a central place that everyone can go to find out the status on a project, it makes it much easier and you'll have a stronger team for it. The other thing is around reward process. And this is really important when you have a team that works together. If you have a team that works together, it's so important to reward people, to recognize each other when people do really great work, go above and beyond, and let the rest of the team know. The same thing's in place if I said, like before, you have one person that works for you, you have 2 people, and they're not working as a team. You just have resources that maybe directly report to you. Is reward people sometimes with greater responsibility. Meaning if you had the initial task where they're working on ABC project, give them a little bit leeway on the next project. Allow them to use some of their creativity to come up with a solution. Sometimes what I'll do with a lot of my team members, in the beginning I might have told them I like you to do A, B, and C. But as we work together over time, what I'll tell them is say, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Do you have a recommendation or a way you'd like to get to point D? Meaning, this is what I need, this is where I need to, this is where I am, this is where I need to go. Can you fill in the blanks on helping us get there? And what I find is that works really well because now I'm leveraging more of their expertise. I'm giving them the opportunity to shine and share what they are able to do and bring more to the table, as well as sometimes it's a great discovery because you'll be surprised. People may do some amazing stuff that you'd never thought of before because you just didn't create that opportunity for them to shine. The other thing is all about communicating and communicating often. Sometimes it will feel like overkill, but the reality is you really have to do a lot of communication when you don't have individuals that are near you and work with you, because you have to establish some type of relationship at the end of the day. Like I said, you have people that are working for you either around the world, across the country, or, even if they're working one state over. The idea is people want to feel like they belong, and people work better when they feel like they're part of something great and something bigger. And to do that, communication really helps you do that. So I do things like when I had a bigger team, I used to do a lot of team meetings. When you have bigger teams, those are really important. Sometimes when you have smaller teams, it can be a little bit of a drag. So you might do business update emails or things like that. Maybe you do monthly meetings with your team. So you sit down with an individual every single month and y'all just talk for 15, 20 minutes. How are things going? Anything we can improve? Are you happy? Do you want to do more? Do you want to do something different? Just creating that kind of avenue. The other thing is always use instant messaging tools, especially for any individual that is online often or kind of does a lot more work with you through the internet type of work, especially if people are doing customer service type of work, web coding, design, things like that. Because if they have a quick question or you have a quick question, you want a way that you can actually send them a quick message without drafting a huge email. As well as it's an easy way for you to have a conversation, and it's much faster than getting on the phone. So I find I use Skype a lot for this because it creates a fast way for us to talk about something, and then be able to move on to the next project. As well as a lot of people will ping me on Skype or on Hangout and say, hey, Steph, are you available? And that way, if I'm not available, I can say, hey, I can be available in 30 minutes for a quick call or quick chat. And it's a nice way that a person can reach you right away. And then the last thing is you have to plan when you have a virtual team. It requires a ton of planning. And what I mean by that is you have to understand vacations, holidays. This is really important when you hire people overseas because you have to remember that when they're celebrating large holidays overseas, they may not be available to work. And it's sometimes easy to have blinders up when you're in the US because you think about only your US holidays. But the reality is if you're going to start hiring people in XYZ countries, put it on your calendar what those major holidays are so you know what they are. So you don't email people or ask people to work late or ask people to do something during one of their major holidays. You may find that sometimes people will say yes because they feel obligated, but you don't want to establish that type of relationship. You want people that work for you to feel like you have respect for their time, their holidays, their seasons, and you understand it. And like I said, you'll create such better working relationships when you show appreciation and understand what they have planned if they need to go on vacation, as well as it'll allow you to plan for projects that you have coming up. Give people advance notice as much as you can, especially as you get more and more surge resources that you work with on an ongoing basis. Maybe you have a graphic designer that you don't use all the time. You just tell them, hey, I'd like to have a relationship that anytime I have a project, if you can work on it and you mix it in with whatever else you have on your plate, because maybe they're more like a freelancer. And say, if I give you maybe 24 hours, 48 hours notice, can you let me know if you can work on the project or if you can't work on the project? And if you can, what time is? What happens is it allows them to have some wiggle room in their schedule. Because just because you woke up today and said you have a project for them for the next 2 weeks, doesn't mean they haven't already committed to another project. So the more you can give them advance notice, the much, much better. They'll be happier. And if you have someone you don't work with all the time, let's say, for example, you're hot and heavy, had a project for 45 days, and then it got quiet for the last 2 months because you just didn't have the demand. You just, maybe you did a book launch, and after you did your book launch, you took down the website, you're not doing that launch. It'll be maybe 2 or 3 more months before you either have another product or another book or maybe you're going on tour or something like that. Something has changed. Check in with that individual. Even if you don't have project work, let them know and say, hey, I'm probably not going to do another launch for another 4 or 5 months. I'd love to use you then, but for the next 4 or 5 months, it's going to be a little bit quiet, but I'd like to keep in touch. It's a great way, especially when you use those surge resources to keep the relationship going and have someone ready for you when you do need them again. Other thing I just wanted to talk about is hiring great candidates, because while you can always outsource and you can use all these great tools and you can use the process I said, it's important that you hire right the first time. And I've hit some of these things before, but I think the key pieces that I want you to take away from this slide is how important it is to write a really good job description. You don't want to say, I want to hire someone to do customer service. I want to hire someone to edit my blog. You want to be something, or my book. You want deliverables and a description that's much more detailed. You want to let somebody know, I want someone who can reconcile my books once a quarter or once a month. I want someone who the first week of the month will reconcile my books. I want someone who can work in XYZ platforms or in these software tools. I want someone, or I'm looking for someone with XYZ background or experience. I want someone who's familiar with A, B, and C industry. Really be specific. The more specific you can be, the more likely you'll find the right candidate. Now, I don't say these things have to be requirements, but what I like to do when I do a job description, especially for virtual, is I'll put the things that are required or must-haves, and then I'll create another category for optional items, or things that I would say are things that can maybe help me distinguish a candidate but are not 100% requirements. And that's where I start to put some of these things like industry knowledge or experience or something like that if I do feel like it's a little bit lighter. The other thing I find works really well is in your cover letter, or when you ask someone to submit a cover letter, ask them to explain why the job is a good fit for them. Why do they want it? What you want is some perspective before you get on an interview with somebody on what they're looking for. Because, like I said, a lot of times people will tell you if they're looking for A, B, and C, and that's not what you're looking for. It's not that they're not a bad worker, or that they're it's anything negative. It's just sometimes they're not the right candidate. Someone's looking for a different type of role. For example, if you're a person that's very detail organized or oriented, or you're very organized or all about structure, put that in there so a person knows and you know to hire someone who leans more towards a lot of structure. Because hiring somebody who kind of likes to be ebb and flow and have a lot of things kind of going on at once, but just doesn't like, well, this way versus that way, it's just not going to be a good match. It's not about are they good at their job. What happens is it doesn't become a good match between you and them. The other thing is, if you're going to do interviews, highly recommend you draft interview questions. The reason being is you have to make sure you ask all your candidates the same questions. Where a lot of people struggle in trying to choose the right candidate is they had different types of interviews across the board, and therefore they aren't able to compare their candidates to figure out who's better at what or the other. I'm not saying you write down 20 questions and ask all 20 questions. What I think is there should be some core 5 questions that you ask everyone. And then from there, based on who they are, you may have another 5 or so questions that are a little bit different. But the core questions should be the same so that you can do a good comparison. And then I already mentioned before is doing something, like I said, short-term project, 2-hour, 1-day project will allow you an opportunity to work with them. And then the last thing, I know we're kind of getting close to the 8 o'clock hour. I had so much stuff packed into this webinar, so I know we're going a little bit over, but if you can still stay for the next few minutes, I'd highly appreciate it. And what I just want to run through quickly is some of the key tools that I use and I highly recommend when you are outsourcing or considering outsourcing. And like I mentioned before, you want a tool for some type of project management. Basecamp is the tool that I use for project management. Trello, there's really a ton of them. If you just Google project management or online project management tool, you'll have a ton come up. But I just like Basecamp and I've used it a ton. I highly recommend using either that or something else. Harvest is a tool I use for tracking time. Harvest does a lot of other great things as well. They do invoicing. They actually will help you manage projects as far as putting together a budget and then saying, how much that budget's been used, how close are you to that budget, and so forth. So it does a lot of other features as well. But I love it for time management because it works really well with Basecamp so that, like I mentioned before, people can kind of click a button and track their time very quickly in Basecamp. Or line up the projects in Basecamp with their time allocation. And then that way, instead of me just getting hours for coding, I can get hours for task 1, task 2, task 3, and task 4. I use Bank of America for a lot of my payments. I put it in here, and I know a lot of you are like, why did I put Bank of America in there? Is because I think sometimes people think they need these like extensive payroll platforms to do a lot of your payments. And if you're hiring someone as a contractor, freelancer, outsource, like we're saying here, where this person's not full-time and you're not doing, they're not hiring them as an employee, they're much more contract work. What I find is I use the actual bill pay system in my software. And so in Bank of America, where you can actually send out checks to individuals to pay a lot of my contractors. So instead of me writing checks each month, I can set it up so that it automatically sends out a check to someone who maybe works for me. Let's say, for example, I have a flat rate. They get paid X amount every month. Then that check will automatically go out on second of every month to that individual. And it's a great way for me to save time. It's a great way for me to track because the money is coming directly from the bank account. And as well, it's a great tool. I also use PayPal in the same way, so I pay people via PayPal as well. But I just wanted to mention the Bank of America because I don't think a lot of people realize you can use that bill pay feature to send checks directly to people. As far as finding people, I use a tool. It used to be called Odesk. Now it's called Upwork. I love using that tool because it's a great way to get a lot of various different resources. And I like the way that they track people and their expertise and how they're using and working on their computers. I also use freelancer.com. It's a great way. We have a job board. That's why I have the vegan job logo on there. And I use my own job board when I'm trying to find people. I mention it because we do have a free level. So if you just want to post for like 20 days, it's completely free. But I do use a lot of job boards and post projects. I just let people know if they're remote projects, if I only need them 2 hours a week, or if it's a surge project, I'll say I need them for the next 60 days for X amount of hours per week. I just list that in the job description so people know what kind of job I'm looking for. And then I put Skype on the page because, like I said, I find you need some type of instant messaging tool for people who aren't physically around you. And if they're doing something where they're online, or doing a lot of online work while you're online as well, like in front of their computer in their home office, it's a great way to keep the communication and the conversation going. Okay. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the webinar because we did run a little bit over, but I'm hoping that I gave you a little bit of background, ideas, ways that you can start to use outsourcing, either A, as a way to grow your business, like I mentioned before, as a way for you to find really good candidates, and also thinking of outsourcing a little bit differently so you can get the most out of it. I think, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, a lot of us kind of think of it being as the dumping ground for projects. And what I find is for you to really optimize your business, you can find that you can identify amazing resources, as well as this is a great way for you to find great candidates that might one day turn into full-time resources or bigger commitments. There may be someone who did a search project for you or worked on a website project for you, and then ultimately they may end up being your full-time coder, or they may end up being your part-time coder or something like that. So I find this is a great way to find great talent, to find expertise and bring it in your business as you need it, to do it in an economical way, and to do it as your business grows, as the ebb and flow in your business changes. And it's a great way to get things done without it all being on your shoulders. So if you hadn't thought about outsourcing before, I hope after this presentation you're like, yeah, I could do that. If you were thinking about outsourcing one way and you're kind of thinking, oh, I can use it not just as a way to maybe cut costs, but it's a way that I can grow my business, I'm hoping that you're walking away kind of with that aha moment. And then lastly, no matter where you were from an outsourcing standpoint before this, I hope I've given you some tips, some suggestions, some ideas on how you can put a strong structure in place. So not only if you find a great candidate, you can keep a great candidate and you can really get the best out of what you're doing. You limit a lot of rework, as well as create really long-lasting and strong relationships with your kind of extended team, because often what I find is that extended team can really be the key to your success. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining me tonight. I'm just looking around. It looks like everyone's just making comments about how they're looking at outsourcing a little differently or thinking about it a little bit differently. So that's good. Just looking right here. If there's any other comments, I know a lot of people, we have a good amount of people actually signed up for today's webinar. So if you're watching this, but I don't see everyone in here live, so I know a lot of you watch these as the replay, feel free to either email me a question or post it online. We will definitely take a peek at it and try to get back to you. As well as you can always see our tweets on Twitter. Katie does an amazing job of trying to capture a couple quick quotes from me during these webinars. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has made you think about outsourcing differently. And I really hope, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, that these webinars help you really take your business to that next level, make your business much more sustainable, much stronger, and really put you in a place where achieve the things you wanted to achieve with your business. Help us build a stronger, bigger, larger vegan and veg community, as well as help you achieve your dreams in your business and in your life. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up. Thanks again. This is Stephanie from Vegan Mainstream, and I really appreciate you joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, take care.